To the board issue, the smartest thing anybody ever said to me about a board is, cast your board, think of your board as again, to a theater coach, think of your board as a casting exercise. You know, when you think about, oh God, I've got to go out and develop new board members, that something feels like, but if you go to cast a play, you know exactly what the role is, what the requirements of the role are, what they're going to have to do, blah, blah, blah. So think of board development as a casting exercise. And cast your board based on what you want your audience to be 5 to 10 years from now. Don't cast it to solve your problem today. So if you want your audience to have lots of young people, don't wait till they're all there to start getting into it. Cast them now. And 5 or 10 years from now, you'll be able to do that. To the financial piece, the smartest thing that I ever saw was the Guthrie Theater in my time in Minneapolis, who, as they tried to diversify their board in all of its senses, including age as well as culture and diversity. And there were the perceptions, some of them wrong, frankly, about economic means that different groups had or didn't have. They came up with this board policy of to sit on the board means that the money you give to the Guthrie, and board members would come up lunch today. Most boards in the United States have what's called a give or get policy, which is if you sit on a board, you have to generate resources for the organization, either by giving the money if you've got it, or by generating it through soliciting your friends. The deal with the Guthrie was, if you're going to be on the Guthrie board, the check you write to the Guthrie has to be one of the 4 biggest charitable checks you write. Give to your church, give to your alma mater, give to the hospital where your mother has cancer. But if we're not in the top 4, you're not sufficiently emotionally invested in this place to be charged with determining its future, was sort of the view. And what that meant was, when everybody came around the table, those millionaires, those were big checks. And those people that were younger, those were much smaller checks, but there was the same degree of authenticity and commitment and this mutual respect that we've all stretched ourselves within our means and made this a priority. That meant that the absolute dollar figure was less important and there were no second-class citizens. And the total board yield through the ceiling. So I think there's some ways to think about incorporating people around the expectations of money that we can do. To the leadership question, I think, for some people it's going to be time. The other answer to that, of course, is mentoring. And can I say one thing that you also remind me of, which is back to your question? I think part of the other success about orchestras right now is the arts participation, not arts observation. And I think what's really exciting to watch is the, I'm blanking on the guy's name from Venezuela. No, not Dudamel, but he went through the system. In Venezuela, like every 3rd grader plays in a chamber group. Every 3rd grader. And they learn, and they don't play individually, they play in a chamber group, so they learn what it is to perform, and they play by and unconducted, and there's, Dudamel came out of that, the Abruz or something like that, came out of that system. Sistema, that's right. They came out of that system, and as we really are serious about this, the other thing we've got to think about is not letting kids watch the arts. It's making sure kids are doing the arts. You know, in our country, the bottom line on this was, and I'll shut up about this, John Kennedy had 2 big agendas in his presidency that affected everyday citizen. One was the arts, and there's a whole raft of pictures of Kennedy with Casals and Kennedy with Bernstein and Kennedy with, I mean, you can just see them all in your mind. And the other agenda was physical fitness. They had this big agenda, every American should do a 50-mile hike, every American should do 25 push-ups, every American should do 10 sit-ups. I always say those of us who were traumatized by compulsory gym class and still bear the scars of our physical humiliation can thank John Kennedy for this moment. But nobody I've ever met can ever summon mentally a picture of John Kennedy with an athlete. If you say John Kennedy with Muhammad Ali, it means nothing. John Kennedy with Willie Mays means nothing. Kennedy's answer was, watch the artist, but be the athlete. And I think athletics has exploded in our country the way it has, because we know how hard it is to do what a Michael Jordan or Wayne Gretzky does, because we had to do it. And if we're serious about investing people in the arts, it's not enough to expose them to it. We have to involve them firsthand in the creative process and let them feel it and live it in their bodies.
That's a fantastic link. I've never thought of that before. Perhaps you have. Are there any other questions? We don't want too many because there's booze in the back. Yeah! I think you had your hand up the longest. It's right back here. Yes?
Hi. I'm Marianne Julia. I'm also with the Citadel Theater.
Okay.
We're a producing company, but we have a really large facility with 5 performance spaces. And I'm wondering how you think arts facilities should be adapting for the future.
Yeah, you know, I'll say 2 things about arts facilities. To your question, our board doesn't, there are 2 things we do not fund by fiat. One is endowments, which that's a whole other story, because I'm not a big fan of endowments. The other is buildings. And I'm actually very glad that we don't fund buildings right now. Not in absolute, because in an odd way, I don't know if the theater of the future is going to be a major hall of 1,000 seats with big video screens, or it's going to essentially be a TV studio with 20 seats and feeds into 40 locations. I just don't know. And if I don't know that, I don't know how to responsibly plan a facility right now. I think there are two things that are interesting for me about facilities, number one. Number one is, I think the smartest people around facilities in the United States that I've always watched are deeply thoughtful about artistic configuration, emotional subtext, and new possibilities, which is a big mouthful. But my favorite is a woman named Joy Zinnemann, who had a 199-seat thrust house. Started a little theater, semi-thrust, so kind of curved front, so you sit in sort of a semicircle around the actors. And when she got ready to, when she was successful enough, she said, I want to build a second stage. Everybody in the place said, well, okay, so are you going to have like a big proscenium house now? Are you going to have a black box? What are you going to do? And she said, I'm going to build another 199-seat semi-thrust. And everybody said, why? And she said, oh, well, there are a few reasons. Number one, she said, the 199-seat house is an intimacy that I like. The audience always being subliminally aware of each other is what interests me. Aesthetically and psychologically, it's the space that serves me best. And I'm not interested in the other emotional dynamics of this. What I thought she said was brilliant, though, was, she said, unfortunately, I'm driven by a subscription model. I announce 6 plays in advance, and if a show's doing really well, we close it down artificially because the next show has to come in. If I have 2 spaces that are the same, I can just load the second show into the other space. It doesn't affect the design, it doesn't affect the blocking, it doesn't do whatever. I can keep the first one running as long as it's got legs. The first year she did that, she opened with India Inc. by Tom Stoppard, which nobody thought would be a big hit. She ran it 4.5 months, did $1.7 million in individual ticket sales, in addition to the subscriptions, and then she only got in trouble subsequently because she had Gross and Decency downstairs and Vagina Monologues coming upstairs. They were both huge hits, and she had another show, and something had to stop. You know, she made the right decision. She put Vagina Monologues on hiatus for a little bit and brought it back in the summer, but ultimately it was just a whole radical way of thinking about deeply rather than, she was thinking about depth rather than breadth, as it were. The other thing I would say about that's interesting to watch, some of the major theaters in the United States are deliberately opening new structures where they're shrinking the size of the auditorium. And if I had to predict, if I had to say what's the asset we have in the theater right now, in the theater business, Broadway theater for us, or the commercial theater, does 2 things nonprofit theaters can't do. Stars, I mean, Meryl Streep will appear on Broadway. She will not go to Lincoln, Nebraska to appear in The Three Sisters or whatever. She just won't do it unless she has family. The other thing is spectacle. Huge production budgets and spectacles and big musicals. Witness Spider-Man. Yeah. As a total side, I have a friend who, this is a terrible story. He had a series of strokes, and when he came out of the strokes, he said, the first thing he said that they knew he was all right was he looked up at the doctor and said, well, at least it's not Spider-Man. And we thought, okay, got it. Anyway, okay. They're downsizing the auditorium, and if I had to say what's the theater of the future, my catchphrase has become epic imagination and intimate encounter. Because I think the future of the theater hinges on an expansive imagination, behaving in untraditional ways, but an intimacy and a proximity to those actors that gives you, especially for a generation raised on movie and television screen close-ups, who sit in front of screens all day, sitting in the back of a 2,000-seat house, unless that's Meryl, isn't going to cut it anymore.